On INSEAD Knowledge, we're joined by Martin Gargiulo, Associate Professor of Organisational Behaviour. In your book chapter, The Dark Side of Trust, from a few years ago, you touch on the trust issues, the deficiencies with trust. What was it about the Madoff affair that fits in with the trust theory?
I think if you will ask today the people who gave him money, he would say that they were too trustful. I thought that the case was a wonderful example of how things that are very important for our daily life and for the working of our economies can also have what economists call negative externalities, which is like bad things in layman language. And trust is one of them. We always think of, if you can have trust, it's much better, okay? I trust you, it's better. We can trust our institutions, that they will do the job. But there is something like too much of a good thing, and that's exactly what that article that I wrote some time ago with at that time a graduate student of mine, Gökhan Ertug, who is now a professor at SMU. We wrote this article on the dark side of trust. Is it why good things have something bad associated to it? And the story with Madoff was exactly a good example of that.
And in the book chapter, The Dark Side of Trust, you talk about the detrimental effects of trust. What were your findings?
The dark side of trust is a mirror image of the benefit of trust. Let me just precise, but when people talk about trust, they talk a lot about they talk about a lot of things, and so it's important that we get to an understanding. There are two dimensions of trust. One is I trust that you have the capabilities to do what you say you want to do. If somebody hires me as a INSEAD professor for a course, they expect me to know what I'm talking about or to know how to conduct a class. There is another kind of trust which is more important for these purposes, that I trust that you will not harm me if you have an opportunity to do so. This is the kind of trust that allows you to tell some confidential information to somebody. This is the kind of trust that allows you to give Madoff money, thinking that he's gonna say what he says he's going to do. That is, to use that money to give you a return, and so on and so forth. Now, having established that, what is trust? Trust is this belief that you're not gonna harm me if you can. It is important to understand that why is it so good? Well, it's so good for two things, or three things actually, but two are more important for our purposes. One is it lowers monitor cost, okay? If I trust you, I don't have to watch you all the time, okay? I can believe that you're going to do what you're supposed to do. I don't have to monitor. Second, the research has also shown that typically when you trust in a relationship, you evolve into richer relationships and more satisfactory relationships. You think about your relationship with people in your personal life. The more you trust them, the better your relationship with them is. The more you disclose, the more you share. And finally, the deeper the relationships get, because you encompass new dimensions. Now, these three benefits can also become liabilities, and this is where the dark side story. What happens if you have excessive trust? I may monitor you much less than I should. Okay, I assume that you're going to do the right thing, and you don't have to monitor you. I may get into, be satisfied with lower outcomes because I trust that you're good, so I don't compare what you do. This doesn't apply too much in the case of Madoff. I think the most important aspect is the first one. And also I may get into excessive commitments. That may have happened in this case too, because I ended committing a larger, for example, in this case, much more money to you, or in this particular case to the funds that you're managing, violating a very well-known principle of like spreading your eggs. No, don't make sure that you put it all in the same basket. So excessive commitments. And these three aspects, that low monitoring, satisfied with lower outcomes, and the most important, the excessive commitments, clearly happened in the case of Madoff. I mean, people were not monitoring. The interesting thing, and this is something that happened in our, probably behind all this financial crisis, everybody thought that somebody else was doing it. And I think that stems from two things. One, excessive trust on our institutions.
In the regulators.
In the regulators in this particular case. Madoff considered an interview to a lawyer very recently, in which he actually was shocked that he wasn't caught before. He said, well, I thought, I can't believe these people didn't caught me. And everybody thought they were doing their job. And probably, if you think of the regulators, they will think, well, what is the likelihood that a guy will get away with this in the market? The market will monitor. In fact, everybody else is thinking somebody else is monitoring.
And this was somebody who was a former chairman of NASDAQ.
That's the interesting thing with the reputations and trust. If you don't have a good reputation, you cannot default on anybody because nobody trusts you. If you are in an environment, in a very low trust environment, it is very difficult to commit fraud because nobody trusts you. Madoff didn't come from nowhere to sell funds. He started selling funds to a community of which he was somehow a member too, of people who are very well known for being careful investors and who know each other very well. And this is basically the New York Upper East Side Jewish community. I mean, these people are, very, very careful. They know each other very well. They monitor each other. They are examples of trust within this community. And these kind of closed networks in which you know everybody else and everybody else knows you, so like typically of small communities, are essential for trust because everybody's watching. Now, the interesting thing is that once Madoff have established his reputation within this community, he started to branch out. People start contacting him. And, the little that we know about the story, details are coming up, indicates that process. And suddenly, he was in the midst of a very large network, and there are some people mapping that network of investors, spreading throughout the world, in Europe, and beyond, and obviously in the US. But those people didn't know each other. They all trust that somebody else have done the due diligence. And in a context in which these people was giving you systematic returns, not too big, because when the returns are too big, you start being suspicious.
And these were good returns in the teens, month in, month out.
The regularity was very good, but they were 12% in those days. I mean, today would be great, but I mean, if you can get something. But in those days, 12% wasn't something, out of this world. I mean, it was solid. The most important thing was the regularity. But there are also anecdotes of people coming back to him. He will not solicit investors. He will let investors come. So there is a whole game of trust there that if I go to you for something, then I'm less likely to trust. I'm less likely to mistrust, excuse me, because I ask you for that. And if somebody will start asking very many questions, he will say, well, this is not for you. And don't worry, if you had money with me already, I can repay you the money this afternoon, no problem, whatever. I mean, yeah, sure. I said, no, that's not what I meant. Well, no, it's not for you. So you keep the secrecy. That is very difficult to keep in a closed network, but when you go to a broad network, it's very easy because your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing. The people who give you money here, they don't know what you're doing here. Until, of course, the whole thing blows up. So excessive trust leads to very low monitoring because we always think that the institutions won't allow this to happen or somebody else is monitoring. And I think we all have experiences in our personal lives, hopefully not so dramatically bad like Madoff, that relate to that. I mean, we sometimes we don't monitor enough because monitoring is very costly. I mean, you need to look at those numbers, you need to check, and if you think the probability of something bad happening is very low, you don't bother.
In your chapter on the dark side of trust, you say, quote, trust diminishes information gathering and processing costs by reducing the need for monitoring and vigilance, but it can also lead to blind faith, which substantially increases the risk of malfeasance. Now, that seems to be prescient.
Malfeasance requires high trust, because if everybody's monitoring, it's very difficult to get away with these things. So that's the paradox, which is a paradox that happens in a lot of things in social life. You get some benefits, but the benefits, there is no free lunch. It comes with a cost attached. And striking a balance in which you do the right level of monitoring, it is something that we need to achieve or we need to strive. But it becomes very difficult in a context in which the naysayers are regarded as crazy. You know, imagine that 5 years ago, and there were people who did that. They said, look, I mean, this is absurd. There's something wrong here. Oh, come on. I think there is a Russian say, I cannot say in Russian, of course, it says trust but verify. And that I think one of the big reasons, the things I will learn in this process is that because everybody believes on something, that doesn't make it true.
And they've still got to ask the hard questions.
You have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask. They are hard to ask because it takes time and energy from our part.
And your concluding sentence in the chapter is, trust is a good thing, but there can be too much of a good thing.
It can be too much of a good thing when it leads you precisely to these negative outcomes, okay? When it leads you to cut your monitoring cost too fast, too soon, okay? When it leads you to excessive commitments, when it leads you to satisfaction with suboptimal outcomes. And it's interesting to see how those things can be fueled by networks, in the sense that those closed networks may give us the presumption of that everything is going well because everybody else is watching. But if everybody else thinks that somebody else is watching, nobody needs to watch. So I think also one of the things I will learn on this is that some people have argued that the development of the institutions of modern society, and especially modern capitalism, allow us to do away with interpersonal trust. If you go to more less developed societies, interpersonal trust is clue. Even in Asia, I mean, where in some countries the institutions of capitalism, the legal institutions, the monitoring institutions are not that developed, or are not seen as reliable, interpersonal trust is crucial. I mean, if I don't know you, I don't do business with you. Now, that's very costly because it restricts the range of possibilities I have. But we have to be careful not to go on the other extreme and to think that the institutions will do away with interpersonal trust, and obviously with the monitoring that needs to be go along with trust, to make sure that we don't create too many opportunities for malfeasance. That is what happens when we don't monitor.
But you're not saying we shouldn't trust people.
No, I don't say we shouldn't trust people. Quite the opposite. Okay, I don't know. I don't know why I write about these things. Maybe I'm not that, trusting. But I think that Spanish is my mother tongue, and there is a saying in Spanish, I don't know if it is an equivalent in English, there is opportunity makes the thief. If we lower monitoring costs too much, we can use resources for other purposes, yes, but you also create opportunities for some people to act in a way that defaults on the trust that we place on them. And I think that's true for people, but it's also true for institutions. We tend to trust our institutions sometimes too blindly. I think we learn today that institutions, even in countries where are supposed to be very good, may not work. There is a series of factors that push these institutions. I mean, we blame the regulators today, but I would like to put people in the position of a regulator in an environment which people, the dominant ideology, think that these people are just obstacles in the way business and the market can operate, and therefore they should be left aside. And probably was very difficult for these guys to do their job too. I mean, they probably thought that they were doing something not that important, and nobody believed that they were important. Let's hope that today we don't go in the other direction, and we put so many obstacles that doing business become almost impossible.
Martin Gargiulo, Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior at INSEAD, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.